Starlit Wedding by Adeerus Ghayan. Chapter 1. The stars spoke in eternal light, and beneath them, 3 rabbits danced in ephemeral joy. Winter, in its moonless hush, whispered farewell beneath the rising sun. Melting ice sang along a Himalayan stream that wound past the ancient observatory ruins at the lake's edge, then emptied into a lake so clear it seemed to cradle the sky itself. Atop the lake's northern rim, where the earth sloped away to reveal the mughull town of Darkashi, cupped in the valley, 4 women sat on a ledge of wind-smoothed rock. The air was thinner here, each breath crisp with the scent of last year's snow and the resin of pine. Behind them, the slope bloomed wild, with mountain thyme and silvery sedge. Ahead, the lake mirrored the heavens so perfectly that clouds drifted across its surface like ghosts of the sky. From the thaw emerged 3 lithe rabbits, their silhouettes engaged in a silent ballet, a nuptial dance that heralded spring. 2 pursued a solitary doe, beneath a sun that cast its golden gaze upon the awakening earth. The hour was early enough that shadows stretched long and deliberate, and the bowl of the valley burned with the sun's coppery ambitions. At the point where the observatory ruins met the lake's edge, 4 figures gathered for a quiet picnic breakfast, 3 young women, and 1 middle-aged woman. The tallest of the 3 sat folded in a knees-to-chest posture, beside a battered field notebook, balanced on a flat stone. Its cover bore her name, Varia Ishara, encircled by a few lines of numbers and star charts that vied for space across the title page. To her left sprawled a red-cheeked young woman, boots off, sleeves rolled, arms extended to catch every drop of morning sun. On the other side, the shortest of the trio poured tea from a copper thermos, tilting it with such care that the stream fell without a splash. At the water's edge, the middle-aged woman crouched, flinging bits of honeysoaked bread to the lake's mirror carp. Each toss was punctuated by an exclamation, sometimes in the old tongue, sometimes in the half-playful scold familiar to matriarchs everywhere. They spoke little. Occasionally, the sunbather released a low, wordless sound of contentment. The shortest woman, sipping her tea as if testing it for poisons, only once remarked, "The clouds are putting on quite a performance tonight." Varia's pen remained still in her hand. Her eyes tracked the last stubborn star, as it faded into dawn's pale fire, memorizing its coordinates like a navigator plotting a course home. Below, in the valley, the town of Darkashi unfurled like a scroll. Its terraces and domes etched into the earth, every incline carved by human hands into narrow paths and sudden drops. The broad, winding streets shimmered with metallic stone, worn smooth by generations of footfalls, and the relentless kiss of sunlight. Above them, rooftops caught the morning's brilliance, transforming the city into a glittering hoard of gold coins, scattered across the valley floor. At its highest point, the new Bramkhan Observatory and its neighboring towers rose above the rest, their crystal windows flashing like distant stars. From deep within the town, a ceremonial chiming of bells echoed outward, marking the hour with quiet grandeur. "Rabbits!" The middle-aged woman's exclamation sliced through the moment, like a thrown stone across still water. Everyone but Varia turned to follow her finger, toward the far side of the lake, where 3 grey shapes darted along a ridge of tumbled stone. The rabbits moved in single file, pausing, then scattering, as if even here, far above the reach of hunters, instinct compelled them to perform their ancient pantomime of fear. She beamed, with the unshakable conviction of a prophet. 3 at once. You know what that means." The sunbather stretched like a cat, and smirked. "It means the strawberry patch won't survive till sundown." The second woman, still pouring tea with surgical precision, made a small gesture of respect toward the darting shapes. "Triple luck, Auntie Harofa." "That's what my grandmother used to say." Harofa turned sharply, hands on hips, first to the tea drinker, then to the sunbather. "Mina, how many times do I have to tell you I'm only Varia's aunt? And that goes for you, too, Celia." Celia didn't open her eyes. "You lecture like you raised half the valley." Harofa clapped her hands, and spun toward the lake, undeterred. And yes, triple luck. Do you know what that means? Luck. Mina and Celia echoed, deadpan. Harofa gasped theatrically. No wonder you're all still single. If you don't know what triple rabbit luck means, what hope is there? Celia didn't even look up. Says the woman who's been single longer than the observatory's been standing, she muttered, just loud enough for Mina to hear. Mina stifled a laugh behind her teacup. It is a sign of a grand wedding, mark my words. Harofa wheeled to face Varia, who had not reacted at all, and fixed her with a look designed to penetrate even the thickest scholarly abstraction. You, Varia Jan, do not even blink. Have you grown so wise that omens bore you? Varia set her pen down on the notebook, with deliberate care. Let's calculate the odds of rabbits traveling in threes. Given the population density in this region, the visibility along the ridge, and the number of strawberry farms already raided in the past week alone, I'd estimate that picnic parties like ours witness such a formation roughly twice a week, on average. Mina stifled a laugh behind her teacup. Celia made a theatrical sound of injury, clutching her heart. Logic is good for the observatory, Harofa sniffed, but the world runs on luck, not numbers. Sure, the world of brutes, not of civilization. And until this morning, we were part of civilization. We run on numbers, Varia countered. Harofa waved the remark away, and continued, you'll see. There will be a wedding, and soon. And if you're wise, you'll pay attention for once. She sat back, satisfied, and resumed feeding the carp with exaggerated dignity. The day passed quickly, with the friends and the aunt coaxing Varia into laughter, sun-warmed games, and half-serious debates about omens, astronomy, and the mating habits of rabbits. They shared tea, honeyed bread, and stories that wandered between memory and myth, until even Varia's notebook lay forgotten beside her, its pages fluttering in the breeze like a flag of temporary surrender. The sky had deepened, clouds, once white, now reflected in burnished orange and strange lilac. The four women watched in companionable silence as the rabbits vanished, leaving only a faint agitation in the grasses to suggest their passing. Down in the valley, Darkash's lanterns multiplied, their light snaking through the town's winding avenues and gathering in small, ceremonial pools around each square. On the shore, the chill advanced with the dusk. Mina produced a blanket from her satchel, which Celia immediately seized, and draped over herself and Varia with possessive flourish. Varia, still bent over her notebook, did not resist, though she frowned in a way that suggested further encroachment would not be tolerated. It's almost time, Mina pointed to the setting sun. If we linger, we'll have to pick our way down in the dark. A good night for lanterns, Celia declared. Or for getting lost. Either way, we'll have something to remember. Harofa packed away her bread, dusted her hands, and rose. Her scarf, a riotous tangle of rosewater-scented fabric, billowed as she bent to retrieve her shoes. Come. I do not want to risk the company of wolves, not with such thin-blooded city girls for companions. She led the descent, and the others followed in a file, Varia, frowning at her calculations, Mina, careful with each step, Celia, blanket trailing behind like a regal train. The descent was steeper than it looked from above, and the narrow path demanded attention. They made a curious, mismatched procession, half pilgrims, half errant schoolgirls, each illuminated at intervals by the flickering lamps from below. As they reached the halfway point, where the path curved above a shelf of wind-carved stone, Harofa paused and looked back. You'll see, she called, voice echoing off the crags. By next market day, the whole town will be talking of engagements. Celia rolled her eyes so extravagantly that Mina nearly tripped, laughing. Varia said nothing, but her lips tightened in the faintest acknowledgement, a gesture less of belief than of resignation to the inevitabilities of both family and fate. By the time they reached the first of Darkash's upper terraces, the lake above had vanished into night, and the stars, mere suggestion on the surface of the water before, now stretched cold and absolute across the sky. The scent of tea houses drifted up to meet them, mingling with the distant chime of closing shop bells. As they passed into the reach of civilization, Harofa's voice resumed its cheerful campaign. "You'll see," she repeated, this time softer, but with a conspirator's satisfaction. "Omens are for those who watch. The rest must content themselves with surprises." And in the hush that followed, it was impossible to tell whether Varia's answering smile was one of skepticism or the first glint of anticipation. Upon reaching town, they bid farewell to Celia first, at her family's spice shop, its awning aglow with lanterns, cardamom and dried citrus scenting the air like bottled memories. Mina departed next, her home nestled behind bakeries whose closed shutters couldn't contain the lingering warmth of the day's baking. They exchanged embraces, soft good nights, and looks that held promises of tomorrow, or soon after, whenever fate would reunite them. Harofa and Varia continued alone, their footsteps quieting as the streets emptied around them. Tavern sounds faded behind them, giving way to wind rustling through vines, and distant gate latches clicking shut. The path climbed gently toward Bramkhan, curving past ancient aqueducts and stone sundials, worn smooth by centuries. The faded inscriptions, once precise astronomical calculations, remained as ghostly echoes of forgotten stargazers who had mapped celestial movements with nothing but quill and conviction. With every bend in the road, the town receded further, and stars pressed closer overhead. The few lamps cast low amber halos, their light pooling in quiet defiance of the surrounding dark. Beyond their reach, shadow reigned, broken only by the skeletal glint of the instruments, their gears and mirrors arranged with the precision of a clock dissected mid-tick, as if the stars had entrusted their secrets to machinery and silence. The two women stepped into the observatory's northern wing, where the living quarters lay tucked behind thick stone walls. Varia clutched the day's notebook. Above them, the observatory's great dome stood open to the night, revealing a slice of sky, sharp, infinite, and humming with quiet intent. The corridor greeted them with shadows, cast by a single oil lamp. Their footsteps echoed softly against stone, punctuated by the occasional groan of the dome's machinery settling into place. At her doorway, Harofa turned. "Sleep well, and leave Najmi Kitab on the shelf tonight," she said, her voice carrying both warmth and warning. "Your grandfather's theories will wait. The stars aren't going anywhere." Varia smiled, already thumbing the edge of her notebook. "I know. I just want to check one thing." Harofa raised an eyebrow. "One thing becomes 10. Sleep first. You'll think more clearly in the morning." "All right," Varia said, though the hesitation in her voice gave her away. Harofa chuckled softly and reached for the doorknob. "Good night, stubborn one." "Good night." They parted, two shadows slipping into separate rooms, the observatory settling around them like a held breath. Varia didn't light another lamp, one already burned low, casting a steady amber glow across the room. The air here was tinged with brass polish, dried ink, and the faintest trace of the mountain winds that slipped in through the dome's open mouth. She set her notebook down beside a much older ledger, thick, time-worn, and heavy with use. Its title, Najmi Kitab, was etched in faded ink across the brittle title page, the letters softened by years of handling. Along the edge of the desk, an array of ink pens stood in quiet formation, arranged by thickness and shade. The darkest, reserved for final annotations, rested at the end like a sentinel, waiting for certainty. She opened Najmi Kitab to the familiar pages, columns of ephemerides interwoven with hand-drawn sketches, tracing the blaze star's historical coordinates across centuries. Marginalia bloomed along every edge, tight recalculations, frustrated question marks, and the occasional exclamation, in a language now spoken only by the oldest apprentices in the mountain schools. The star chart showed its projected reappearance, circled faintly in blue ink, the mark blurred by decades of humidity and monsoon seasons that had softened the paper to a velvet fragility. She held the chart beneath the lamplight and compared it to the sky outside. The blaze star was still absent, its place in the Corona Borealis constellation dark and waiting, but her grandfather's note suggested it was imminent. The surrounding stars had begun to align in the predicted configuration, a subtle shift in magnitude here, a spectral signature there. The pattern was forming, like a breath held in the heavens. She reached for the small telescope, an heirloom modeled after a recent European refractor, its brass tube inlaid with lapis and sandalwood filigree, the mount carved in the style of Mughal astrolabes. Though foreign in origin, its locally crafted replicas blended so naturally into the observatory's architecture, they seemed native to it. She began her work with practiced precision. One lens to the sky, one eye to the page, her left hand steadying the slow rotation of the mount. Each data point demanded cross-reference against 3 separate tables, the standard lunar corrections, the rare errata log, and the Najmi Kitab itself. That last she handled with care. The illuminated pages caught the lamplight, scattering faint rainbows across the desk. She recorded her observations in her own notebook, the script tight and unadorned, each entry marked with precise units of magnitude, declination, and spectral classification. The blaze star had not yet arrived, but the sky was preparing for it. An hour in, her eyes began their familiar protest. She massaged the bridge of her nose, kneading the skin until the spots of light danced behind her eyelids. A migraine signaled its approach with the subtlety of a distant storm, first as a tightening above her left brow, then as a prickle of heat behind both eyes. She squinted, fighting the impulse to look away from the telescope. In the next few hours, she filled 5 pages, each entry a chain in the logic her grandfather had constructed over decades. She paused only to re-ink her pen, or pour a measure of cold, bitter tea from the flask beneath the desk. The lamp burned lower. The sky outside deepened to an indigo so pure it looked manufactured. Occasionally, the wind flexed through the dome's aperture, stirring the papers and chilling her exposed wrists. She checked the position once more. She adjusted her calculations, made a notation in the margin, and tried not to think of what it meant for the coming year's predictions. At some point past midnight, fatigue overtook her. Her eyes burned. Her head pulsed with a low, insistent ache. She closed Najmi Kitab with deliberate care, and returned it to its place on the desk. Then, as if restoring order to the cosmos, she aligned every pen, every paperweight, even the abandoned teacup, until the surface mirrored the quiet discipline of the stars. The first light of day climbed the peaks in slow increments, turning snowfields into mirrors, and ridgelines into slivers of burnished gold. The valley filled first with the hesitant illumination of pre-dawn, then with the more assertive brilliance that marked Darkashi as a city of stargazers, every window, every polished cupola catching the sun and flinging it back in hard, unblinking flashes. The Bramkhan Observatory, highest of them all, resembled a half-peeled fruit, its dome gaping wide to the morning. Inside, Varia was exactly where she'd been at midnight, hunched over a stack of papers, eyes rimmed red from effort. Her hair, which by custom should have been pinned and covered, tumbled loose around her shoulders. She was making one final pass through the numbers, this time searching for errors born of fatigue, or the creeping unreliability of her own confidence. Outside, a flutter at the dome's lip. A pigeon, plump, grey, and wearing the faint indignation of all professional messengers, perched on the brass rail that circled the observatory's eye. It regarded her with the flat stare of the overworked, then ruffled its wings and sidled sideways until it was directly above the narrow balcony that ringed the uppermost window. Below, footsteps, soft, hesitant, then emboldened. An aide, a teenager, entered with an armload of books and a faint sheen of perspiration on his brow. He walked through the observatory and stopped at Varia's door, knocking gently on the open frame. "Yes," Varia said, without looking up. "Morning, Scholar Ishara," he replied, stepping inside with the careful deference of someone who'd been sharply corrected for informality in the past. "Morning, Farid," she said, still focused on her work. "There's a message." He gestured upward with his chin, then turned to the sideboard, pretending to inventory the tea service with the studied distraction of someone trying not to intrude. Varia glanced at him, sighed long and low, and pushed back her chair. The screech of its legs against the marble floor echoed through the observatory, stirring the silence like a bell. She stepped out, Farid trailing behind. On the balcony, the pigeon shifted, fixing her with a shrewd, sideways glance before extending one leg. Tied there, with a knot more elaborate than necessary, was a scroll of pale paper. The seal still intact. Varia untied the message, stroked the bird's head, an old superstition, but one she honored, and unrolled the paper. The seal bore the unmistakable sunburst of the royal house, the ink so dark it looked scorched into the fiber. The handwriting was a parade of flourishes and ceremonial loops, a formal request for the observatory services in determining the auspicious conjunctions for a forthcoming celebration of state importance. Varia read it aloud. "What celebration?" Farid asked. She sighed, shaking her head. "It means the palace wants the best dates for a month-long wedding and expects the Ashara line to deliver them before the king's courier arrives. Which, judging by the seal, is already en route and no more than a day's ride away." Farid, who had edged closer, tried to mask his excitement. "Does this mean?" "It means the stars are, apparently, in perfect working order, because the wedding's already been announced." She turned, muttering, of all things, it had to be a wedding, and stepped back inside, closing the balcony door with a soft click. "And I'll need a fresh pot of kahwa and a clean copy of the Najmi tables." Farid hurried off, his step noticeably lighter, heading toward Harofa's room. Varia rubbed her temple and muttered to herself, "Yes, that's exactly what I needed, Aunt Harofa learning about it first thing in the morning." Left alone, Varia read the message once more, then folded it into the inner pocket of her notebook. The faint ache above her brow reminded her that whatever else the day promised, it would be undertaken at a disadvantage. She was still at the desk, reading the prior generation's calculations, when a commotion erupted from the main entrance. In the seconds before the door burst open, Varia counted 3 distinct sounds: a heavy ring of bangles striking against stone, a sharp, familiar exclamation, and the unmistakable shuffling of fabric layers on a mission. Aunt Harofa swept in, more colorfully arrayed than any of the observatory's flags, her scarf a drama of embroidered poppies, and her skirt voluminous enough to suggest at least 3 layers of hidden storage. She carried no fewer than 5 small parcels, tea, pastries, what looked suspiciously like a medicine bundle, and her hair, silvered at the roots, gleamed with fresh henna. "News," she announced, as if the word itself were reason for celebration. "Wonderful news." Varia looked up from her desk. "You heard?" Harofa dropped her parcels on the bed and swept across the room like a gust of wind. "Heard?" "Varia, the palace couldn't outrun the gossips of Darkashi if it tried. Half the town knew before the ink dried." "And didn't I tell you?" The omen was unmistakable. She seized Varia's hands, her grip startlingly warm. "A wedding. A royal one. I said it would come, didn't I? The rabbits were in perfect formation. You doubted. You always doubt. And now look, it's even grander than I foresaw. Not just a union, but an alliance. Rivals, now aligned, this wedding is their celestial truce." Varia extracted her hands, more amused than annoyed. "I doubted only that 3 rabbits signified political alliances." "Everything points to alliances," Harofa said, shaking her head with theatrical disappointment. "Honestly, child, you should start charting the stars for the wedding. A little diversion might do you good, and who knows, you might finally see something besides stars." Farid reappeared, with a tray of cups and a new flask of kahwa. He set it down with reverence, then stood back, uncertain whether to stay or to make himself invisible. "Thank you, Farid," said Varia, pouring herself a measure. "Please prepare the observatory's response. The message must go out by the next pigeon." He nodded, smiling at Harofa as he exited. She winked at him, then turned back to her niece. "I will help you compose the letter, Harofa announced, though it was unclear whether this was offer or command. You must impress them. And maybe, when you deliver the charts, you'll finally meet someone who can compete with your precious constellations. She arranged herself in a chair, spreading her skirts to occupy maximum surface area. Varia, who wore the clothes she had the night before, seemed an ink sketch next to Harofa's painted illumination. She prepared her tools with measured care, then set to work. For the next hour, the only sounds in the room were the scratch of a pen on paper and the occasional slurp of kawa. Harofa busied herself with the parcels, unwrapping, sampling, and setting aside the finest for Varia. Every so often, she read aloud from the royal message, embellishing it with theatrical commentary. They say auspicious, but what they mean is urgent. Someone's desperate to impress the king. Varia didn't respond, her head bent low over the desk, eyes fixed on the wedding star chart. Eventually, Harofa leaned in, her voice gentler now. Before your mother was engaged, I read the omens too. Said she'd marry an astronomer, and that she'd never truly leave the sky behind. Everyone laughed, of course. She looked at Varia with that peculiar blend of pride and melancholy only the older generation can summon. And yet, here you are. Varia said nothing, but the faint softening around her eyes betrayed the effect. By the time the note was ready, the sun had fully claimed the sky. The observatory glowed, every surface alive with refracted light. Varia rolled the message, tied it with the official ribbon, and placed it in the brass tube. She turned to Harofa, who had already wrapped her scarf, ready to leave. I suppose I should thank you, Varia said, her voice dry, but not unkind. You will. One day. Harofa patted her cheek, then called out, Farid. Like a summoned spirit, Farid appeared in the doorway a moment later. It's ready, Varia said, nodding toward the message tube. He took it without a word and disappeared down the corridor. Harofa moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold. Over her shoulder, she called, and next time, when you see 3 rabbits, remember your aunt. And now go to bed. I know you would have stayed up all night. Now take rest. No one will disturb you. She closed the door behind as she exited. Varia allowed herself a moment of stillness. She reached for her notebook, turned to a clean page, and said, Today, the omens won. Another tick in their column. She sat on the divan with both hands over her eyes, trying to will herself into wakefulness. It didn't. Sleep dragged her under, a tide too powerful to resist. Her arm slumped across her face, while her shoes scattered beneath the divan at impossible angles. The rhythmic jabbing of a pen's blunt end against her ribs finally broke through. She blinked awake to find Aunt Harofa looming over her, face alight with a mixture of worry and barely contained excitement. Up, Varia-Jan, Harofa hissed. Town. Now. Varia's protests died against Harofa's vice-like fingers. There's an announcement, Harofa insisted, voice rising. You can't miss it. And frankly, you resemble evidence from a murder investigation. Clean yourself. The observatory readings, Varia started, but Harofa had already scooped up her shoes, thrusting them into her hands. Farid has the observatory, she declared, hauling Varia toward the basin. You need sunshine, kebabs, and to hear the news alongside everyone else. Correct, Farid. As if conjured, Farid materialized with a solemn nod. The observatory remains in safe hands, scholar. Enjoy yourself. In the vestibule, Harofa practically carried her niece, dabbing at her face with a handkerchief before wetting her thumb to attack an ink stain on Varia's forehead. Despite Varia's trampled-looking hair and hopelessly wrinkled shirt, Harofa nodded with satisfaction. She herself glided forward in an electric blue kaftan threaded with silver, moving with the assurance of someone who knew her presence commanded attention, however brief. Outside, the evening sun was slipping toward dusk, casting long shadows across the observatory's marble threshold. As they descended the steps, a shaft of sunlight struck Varya full in the face, sharp and blinding. She squinted, blinking rapidly, trying to adjust, not just to the glare, but to the sudden swell of movement and sound below. The main street was a current of bodies, traders hauling spice and dried fruit, scholars gesturing with oversized scrolls, groups of children playing games that involved elaborate patterns of jumping and clapping. The whole town seemed to be converging on the southern terraces, where the shops and tea houses spilled their customers onto the flagstones. At the first corner, Celia and Mina materialized from a side alley. Celia wore a hat that might have been a dare, its brim so wide that it knocked a passing vendor's basket clean off his head. Mina, in understated grey, smiled and offered Varya a sweet wrapped in rice paper. "You survived the night," Mina said, with a touch of awe. "Barely," replied Varya. "We sent the reply, if anyone cares." Celia linked arms with her. "Everyone cares. The town is obsessed. My mother has already bet her cousin 2 jars of honey that the wedding will be postponed by at least a week." "What did you predict?" Varya shrugged. "They wanted what they wanted. I just made the stars agree with them, and gave them 3 windows, each one auspicious." Harofa, who had taken the lead, spun around to walk backwards, her face lit with mischief. "Auntie says the first window will be chosen. To delay is to tempt fate, and you know the king's people, they don't like waiting." Celia raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were only Varya's aunt." Harofa didn't miss a beat. "And that should tell you who I was talking to." Varya, still groggy, allowed herself to be swept along. The crowd thickened as they neared the southern quarter, where the Daraj Najmi, a wide staircase that doubled as the town's public forum, was already packed with bodies. The 4 women claimed a spot halfway up, shielded by an awning and within reach of a vendor selling fried dough and sweet drinks. Varya let herself sink into the chaos, her fatigue giving way to a strange, manic clarity. The square pulsed with life, a riot of banners flickering in the breeze, every surface ringing with the sound of expectation. Children shrieked. Merchants called out their wares. And a group of young men rehearsed the songs of the season, with theatrical bravado. Mina handed a rice paper sweet to Harofa, who divided it with diplomatic precision. Celia returned from a vendor with 3 portions of fried dough, distributing them down the line like ceremonial offerings. "Look," said Mina, nudging Varya in the ribs. "There's the palace's man." He stood at the top of the staircase, robed in the formal silver and blue of the royal house, a scroll in one hand, and a brass-capped staff in the other. The crowd pulsed with anticipation. As he began to read, his voice was magnified by the design of the staircase, carrying clear over the heads of the assembly. "By decree of his radiance, sovereign of the realm, and with the blessing of the celestial calendar, let it be known. The noble houses of Khosaran and Elvamir, long divided by grievance and blood, shall be joined in marriage. This union shall mark the formal end of hostilities and the beginning of shared governance and enduring peace. The union shall be sealed in Darkashi, beneath the star's first blessing, as decreed by his radiance." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, a wave of sound that rolled through the square like thunder. Banners lifted higher. Children danced in the dust. And even the merchants paused their shouting to join the chorus of celebration. Somewhere near the fountain, a musician struck up a tune, and the town, just for a moment, felt like the heart of a new era. "See? What did I tell you? It would be the first date." "I know how the world operates," Harofa said proudly, turning to the girls with a triumphant smile. Mina grinned. "Who wants to place a bet on the next twist?" "What will it be?" Celia raised her hand. "Will the bride or the groom cry first?" "Both," Mina replied, deadpan. Simultaneous tears. Everyone laughed. Varya quietly bit into the fried dough, savoring the sweetness as it melted on her tongue. Above them, the banners snapped in the wind, each one more vivid than the last. On the staircase, the palace's herald concluded the announcement and gestured for the crowd to disperse. but the people lingered, unwilling to surrender the moment. They stayed, talking, laughing, speculating about which alliances might be forged or fractured in the weeks to come. Varia glanced at her aunt, then at her friends, then up at the sky, as if searching for Blaze star. By next day, the Daraj Najmi had shed all pretense of being a mere public forum, and transformed into the town's collective theatre. Steps and balustrades overflowed with spectators. The soundscape was a weaving of laughter, argument, speculation, and the high, unflagging squeal of children. Banners in every conceivable hue fluttered from the upper terraces. Street musicians tuned their stringed instruments and set up at the margins, ready to drown out official speeches with their own improvisational anthems. The light of midday, reflected and refracted by polished windows and the vast copper domes above, made even the plainest garments seem lit from within. All four women stood among the crowd, absorbed into its shifting mass as anticipation thickened around them. Varia felt the energy shift as word spread that the town's formal announcement would begin at the hour's next bell. At the base of the staircase, vendors had set up impromptu stalls. The smell of roasting nuts and mountain honey braided with the scent of brewed kawa, so thick in the air that one could almost taste it. Nearby, a group of elder men debated the relative merits of past royal weddings, punctuating their arguments with exaggerated gesticulations and the clacking of prayer beads. Children darted between the legs of the assembled adults, some wearing capes or headdresses crafted from colored paper, others simply intent on breaking the record for most steps ascended without tripping. The bell sounded, reverberating off the stone, and the crowd fell into an anticipatory hush. Onto the platform stepped the Alanja, resplendent in sapphire robes edged with gold, his beard so immaculately trimmed it seemed lacquered. He unrolled a ceremonial scroll, the action itself a performance, and waited for the final echoes of the bell to die. By order of the sovereign palace, he began, his voice clear as a bell and rich with theatrics, let it be known throughout the town of Darkashi and the territories bound by her sky. An alliance of peace and prosperity shall be sealed in the coming month. The House of Mughal, East and West, have agreed at last to unite their first heirs. A wave of sound rippled through the crowd, a part exclamation, part incredulity. The announcement was the same as yesterday, but this time it came wrapped in theatrics and local flair, delivered by Darkash's own Alanja. He raised one hand, and the square fell into silence, as if the gesture itself carried royal authority. From the new moon of Akazel to the full moon of Barizad, our town will play host to the Grand Union. A celebration of two houses, once rivals, now joined. All citizens are invited to observe, to participate, and to bear witness to this reconciliation. Another roar. And, the Alanja intoned, his gaze sweeping the steps, let it be known that the observatory of Bramkhan, and all her scholars, are hereby recognized by his radiance for their devoted service in reading the omens and identifying the date of celestial favor. May the record of this union, sealed in the town of Darkashi, endure through the generations as a testament to peace, wisdom, and the will of the stars. A cheer rose from the section of the crowd most invested in the town's intellectual prestige. Varia, caught off guard, found herself blushing under the sudden onslaught of eyes and applause in her general direction. Mina nudged her in the ribs. "You're famous." "I hate being famous," Varia muttered. "Then you should have chosen a less conspicuous line of work," Celia commented. Harofa basked in the announcement as if it were addressed to her personally. She lifted her hands to the sky in benediction, then leaned into Varia, her voice conspiratorial. "This is perfect, my dear. A month of balls, dinners, and introductions. We must find you a proper match while the city is thick with eligible men." Varia's expression, somewhere between horror and resignation, elicited a peal of laughter from Mina. "You cannot be serious," Varia whispered. "My schedule is all ready." "Of course I'm serious," Harofa countered. "If not for yourself, then for the sake of the family's good standing. Besides, you have had your nose in the stars too long. Time for earthly matters." Varia's riposte was interrupted by a commotion near the steps, where a group of children had started a game that involved hurling pebbles at a painted target on the wall. The stones clattered, the painted circle already pockmarked by years of similar contests. The youngest participant, a girl with hair tied up in a constellation of knots, shrieked with triumph as she hit the center. An elder, seeing the game, scolded them with a wag of his walking stick, then slipped the winning girl a coin when he thought no one was looking. Everywhere, the crowd decompressed into smaller clusters, each with its own agenda. Merchants hashed out strategies for limited stock. Craftsmen boasted about past work and exaggerated the scope of their future projects. Grandmothers sized up their grandchildren's prospects for marrying into the new royal lineage. The town was, in that moment, less a collection of individuals than a single organism, metabolizing the news and excreting hopes, plans, and the inevitable gossip that would fuel the next several market days. Above it all, the copper dome of the observatory gleamed, unwavering. Varia looked up, already calculating the logistical nightmare of charting both the celestial and social events of the coming month. Her calendar would be ruined. Her experiments put on hold. And the routine that had given her life shape would now buckle under the weight of royal obligation. But, standing here, surrounded by the heat and noise and hunger for something new, she felt something unfamiliar. Not dread, but a strange, jittery anticipation. As the sun inched past noon, Harofa excused herself to confer with a knot of matrons near the tea stall, no doubt preparing a coordinated assault on the inbound bachelors. Mina finished her sweet, satisfied. And Celia peeled off to test the fried honey sweet she'd heard about 3 steps back. Varia stayed on the landing, watching the crowd dissolve into its old patterns, but with a new voltage running beneath. A breeze, sharper than before, cut through the square. The banners snapped. The pennants shivered. And for a brief instant, Varia imagined that the town itself had become an extension of the observatory. Every window a lens. Every street a coordinate. Every person a variable in a vast, unsolvable equation. Then, above the noise, the voice of a child, Varia Ishara. She turned, startled to see the constellation-haired girl from before, now carrying a fistful of painted stones. "Are you really a star watcher?" the girl asked, eyes bright. Varia nodded. "I suppose I am. Do you know if the Emperor's peacock will appear at the wedding?" Varia considered. "It might," she said. "But the best surprises are the ones no one plans for." The girl looked skeptical, then ran off, already bored with the answer. With the crowd alive around her, Varia slipped her hands into her pockets, lifted her chin to the sky, and prepared herself for a future none of her calculations could predict.